Times Radio, and we can all chat on Pienaar and Friends here on Times Radio.
Across the UK, on DAB, online and on your smart speaker. This is Times Radio, the voice of the Times.
It's 6 o'clock. I'm John Pienaar. Welcome to Pienaar and Friends, which tonight is Noa Hoffman of The Sun and HuffPost UK's Kevin Schofield. We're going to be talking later to the Armed Forces Minister Luke Pollard. So do stay with us. Send us a tweet, send us a text, and we can all join in the conversation after the news with Andy Hayes.
Thank you, John. Good evening. The Prime Minister has confirmed the UK will increase defence spending to 4.1% of GDP by 2027. Sir Keir Starmer's also agreed to increase that to 5% by 2035, along with other NATO countries at a summit in the Netherlands. NATO Secretary-General Mark Rutte says it's a historic commitment.
All allies are united in understanding that we need to step up to stay safe. President Trump has been clear. America is committed to NATO. At the same time, he made clear that America expects European allies and Canada to contribute more.
Shell is in talks to buy BP, according to the Wall Street Journal. Talks between company representatives are said to be active. Times Radio's business correspondent Dominic O'Connell says BP has been struggling.
It set out to be the greenest of the oil majors. It set a hard target to reduce its oil production by the end of the decade. That didn't go down very well. It wobbled. Its chief executive left under a cloud. And it recently said that its chairman, Helge Lund, will be leaving as well. So Shell is striking while the iron is hot.
If the deal comes off, it'll create a company big enough to rival the American giants Exxon and Chevron. Donald Trump insists American strikes on Iranian nuclear facilities have set back Tehran's nuclear ambitions by many years. That's despite a leaked US intelligence report suggesting it only caused minor damage. His defense secretary says the FBI will investigate that leak. Pete Hegseth also has this message for people questioning the attack's success.
You better get a big shovel and go really deep, because Iran's nuclear program is obliterated. Those that dropped the bombs precisely in the right place know exactly what happened when that exploded. And you know who else knows? Iran.
Trump says the US will hold talks with Tehran next week as a ceasefire between Israel and Iran appears to be holding. A man's been found guilty of murdering a 14-year-old boy with a samurai sword as he walked to school in northeast London last April. Marcus Monzo almost decapitated Daniel Anjorin. The 37-year-old also injured 5 other people, including 2 police officers, on a 20-minute rampage in Hainault, something he compared to the Hunger Games. Both the Prime Minister and Deputy Prime Minister say a vote on changes to the benefits system will go ahead on Tuesday, despite there being a chance the government could be defeated. More than 100 Labour MPs are publicly backing a move to block the legislation. There are concerns about cuts to disability benefits. And former England manager Gareth Southgate has been knighted by Prince William at Windsor Castle today. He was recognised for services to football in the New Year honours. He says that receiving the award from the former president and current patron of the Football Association made it more special for him.
The Prince has been an incredible supporter of the England team anyway, so we've been fortunate to share some amazing moments and some disappointments where he's come and spoke brilliantly to the team, so it was great to see him again.
And for a news bulletin when you want it, search for the Times News Briefing on any podcast platform.
Across the UK, on DAB digital radio, on the free Times Radio app, and via your smart speaker.
Pienaar and Friends on Times Radio with Barclays Business Banking.
It's really good to have you with us on Pienaar and Friends, an hour of good conversation in very, very good company, which tonight is Noa Hoffman from The Sun. Hi to you, Noa. Great to see you back.
Thank you for having me.
Always a pleasure. And Kevin Schofield, political editor at the HuffPost UK. Good to see you, Kevin.
Nice to see you, John.
Shall I ask you first, Noa, what's your thought for the day?
So my thought for the day is that as an Australian, I really wanted to commend British people for their barbecue skills. Barbecue's sort of a holy grail for me, and I have been so impressed with the entire thing from start to finish, the hosting, the quality of the meats, the garden games. and just non-stop barbecuing throughout the summer, I really realised that you guys don't get enough credit for adopting one of Australia's great traditions and doing such a good job of it.
This is praise unlooked for.
Highest
and
praise.
the highest it could possibly be. I mean, what's changed? How come we Brits, I'm generalising across the entire barbecue universe of the UK, what are we getting right that we didn't before?
Well, I think it may... sadly be down to climate change and having more extended sunny days. Oh, yeah. So obviously a very bad thing, climate change, but one upside, I suppose, is that there's been way more opportunities to sit and bask in the garden with friends, with some Pims, with some sausages, some burgers, and it's kind of euphoric in a way to just sit in the sunshine in London with some great food, some great conversation. And I found really every barbecue that I've had the pleasure of being invited to has been pulled off 10 out of 10.
Wow. Well, you're not just angling for more barbecue invitations, are they?
Maybe.
Pims, is that a big Australian thing? Pims at a barbecue? I thought it was all about the amber nectar.
Yeah, I've found that's much more of a British offering in terms of booze, but I can't get enough of it. It tastes like summer in your mouth.
Oh, well, it's a cheerful thought. Kevin, what's your thought for the day?
Well, my thought for the day is going to be so dull compared to Noah's, but I've just been struck in the last couple of days, tied obviously to all the welfare stuff that we'll come on to, is how Labour MPs are already openly talking about how long Keir Starmer can last as Prime Minister. And I'm not talking about the usual suspects who've never liked the guy, who are Corbynistas. These are moderate, sensible Labour MPs who have been thoroughly disenchanted, really, by the first year of the Labour government. They think too many self-inflicted errors, too many silly mistakes, and they just wonder whether Keir Starmer has got it, and whether, in that case, they should bite the bullet and move on.
To mutter about the Prime Minister, to mutter about the leader. It's another thing to seriously contemplate the leader being kicked off the stage. I mean, how serious are you talking here?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think there's plots, I don't think there's a fully formed plan. I mean, as we know, history tells us about the Labour Party, they're not very good at getting rid of leaders. They tried to get rid of Jeremy Corbyn and failed twice. They tried to get rid of Gordon Brown in the run-up to the 2010 election, didn't manage it. So, they're not like the Tories, who go through leaders, as we know, with alarming regularity, but Labour aren't very good at it.
Alarming regularity.
So, I'm not saying he's going to be gone this time next year or anything, but there is definitely grumblings of discontent, and he's going to have to up his game, I think.
Interesting. We are going to talk about the welfare rebellion a bit later on in the show, as you would expect. Now, though, I do want to focus on, the twin track stories. We have the NATO Summit today, which was interesting, even though the outcome was thoroughly predictable. It was nonetheless pretty interesting. And then the Middle East, developments in the Middle East, which also had an interesting stage. And to talk through some of this with us, joining us on the programme now, we have back Molly Ball, the senior political correspondent at the Wall Street Journal. Welcome back, Molly.
Hello, John.
Hi.
Happy Wednesday.
Happy Wednesday. Always a better Wednesday when you're part of it, Molly. I want to talk now about NATO and the summit in The Hague, and start with, President Trump. It was all sweetness and light by the end of that summit. He was friends with NATO leaders. They were friends with him. He was congratulating himself on changing the weather and getting them to come into line and be more committed to collective defence. And they were giving him credit for that. But there was still this question, just nagging slightly in the air, about America's commitment under President Trump to the principle of mutual defence, Article 5 of the NATO Treaty, which binds members of NATO into fighting with and alongside each other if anyone is attacked. Now, President Trump was asked about the commitment to Article 5, of course, on his way over to The Hague.
It depends on your definition. There's numerous definitions of Article 5, you know that, right? But I'm committed to being their friends. I've become friends with many of those leaders, and I'm committed to helping them. I'm committed to saving lives. I'm committed to life and safety. And I'm going to give you an exact definition when I get there. I just don't want to do it on the back of an airplane.
Right. So the matter of the obligation to mutual defence was a matter of definition. Today, we saw President Trump talking about commitment to NATO, America being a part of it. Just how deeply and in what circumstances? Again, just a slight haze around that question still, which is one reason why I asked Donald Trump's former ambassador to the EU, Gordon Sondland, what he thought the president meant.
it doesn't mean anything other than do your part in terms of the both financial and moral commitment to the alliance. Don't always look at the United States to do it all. And using Spain as an example, he, browbeat a reporter from Spanish television during the press conference today about her country being terrible and awful because they're not paying their share. But you and I both know, John, if Spain were attacked, and of course the United States is going to do its part under Article 5, I wouldn't pay the slightest bit of attention to him.
No, don't pay attention to him. That's one way of giving out advice about how to take what the president has to say. Spain is not likely to be attacked by Russia, invaded by Russia anytime soon. But his message was that America will be there when America is needed. Molly Bull, you've been watching all of this today. What's your take on where we are now with that all-important commitment that binds NATO members together of collective defence under Article 5 of the treaty? Where do you think we are now with that and with the president?
I think a couple things. I think, first of all, as you laid it out in the beginning of this conversation, world leaders have developed this approach to Trump where they understand that if they can make him feel like he is winning, they are much more apt to get what they want. But they also understand that he is a, profoundly situational thinker, and you are not going to get an ironclad commitment from him to virtually anything. And so at the same time, NATO feels much less wobbly to me than we might have expected at the beginning of a Trump second term, when he came in on, this with this very aggressive push to remake all of these domestic and international institutions. And I think it felt to a lot of people, both at home and abroad, like the whole world as we knew it was caving in. I think particularly in the aftermath of the strike on the Iranian nuclear facilities, which he was taking a big victory lap on in that NATO press conference earlier today, there is a sense that he's not as committed and isolationist as some might have assumed. That was a case from the administration's perspective where an ally needed backup and we gave it to them. The Israelis needed our help, as Trump described it, to take out these sites in a way that only we could, and we provided that assistance. So if what you are wondering is, will America come through in a crunch where we are the only, we're sort of the indispensable power, you got quite a bit of ammunition, I think, for that argument in the events of the past couple of weeks.
Interesting. And it's quite true that when the president was getting it in the neck from both sides, from the isolationists in his own MAGA movement and from those who say we need to back up Israel, we need to be engaged, we need to bomb. He went with those who said we need to intervene and we need to bomb. But those voices of let's not get too enmeshed in foreign wars and foreign conflicts on the other side of the Atlantic, they're still there. And can you imagine American boots on the ground if there's some sort of annexation of a part of Latvia, by troops maybe not in Russian uniform, but we knew that's how they do things, that's how they did it ahead of the annexation of Crimea. What are you thinking, Kevin?
I was wondering actually what Molly's opinion was of how Mark Rutte has approached Donald Trump. Now, we saw today he called him daddy. Now, that does sound weird, and it is quite weird. There was a context to it, but it was still pretty odd. We also saw Trump posted on Truth Social last night a rather fawning private, presumably, message that Mark Rutte sent, fawning, shouting him with praise about how he's dealt with Israel and Iran and how, it's your victory that we've managed to get agreement of the 5% of defence and security spending. Is that the right way, do you think? Is that just what world leaders now have to do with Trump? He responds so well to flattery, to compliments. You have to basically almost throw your self-respect out the window.
I don't know what you mean by almost. Before you answer that, Molly, just have a listen to this. Mark Rutte, Secretary General of NATO, and to be fair to Mark Rutte, he doesn't just suck up to Donald Trump. Privately, he's happy to do it publicly too, maybe even more keen to do that in public. This was Mark Rutte and Donald Trump. They were discussing the situation in the Middle East, but this is how it went.
They've had a big fight, like two kids in a schoolyard. They fight like hell. You can't stop them. Let them fight for about 2-3 minutes, then it's easier to stop them.
And then Daddy has to sometimes use strong language to
You have to use strong language. Every once in a while, you have to use a certain word.
Daddy has sometimes has to step in. That was Mark. I mean, the context is far from amusing, but that sort of language, you've got to say, a kind of dry smile crosses your lips, Molly. I guess you've got to start by saying that Donald Trump likes that sort of stuff, doesn't he?
Well, he does respond well to flattery, and I think you obviously see Rota and others developing this approach where they, in part because they fear him, they believe that if they can suck up to him, they're more likely not to draw his wrath. But he also is very suspicious of anything that he perceives as sort of interested flattery. And I thought the other thing that was very interesting in that regard was the way in the press conference he talked about Putin, that he is sort of dramatically cooled on Putin and dramatically warmed to Zelensky over the course of the past 6 months. Now, to the point where he's even apparently considering continuing to provide material support to Ukraine, which was something that seemed unimaginable, I think, when he came into office 6 months ago. So he certainly hasn't managed to bring that conflict to an end, and he hasn't pleased a lot of the Europeans who would like to see a much more aggressive American support. But I think he also has not fulfilled the worst fears of those who saw him as a sort of extension of Putin in Europe.
Yeah, interesting thoughts on that. I mean, General Philip Breedlove, former Supreme Commander in Europe, he was giving me the view just a few moments ago that he thought maybe Donald Trump was shifting his position somewhat slightly, but maybe significantly on the question of Ukraine. I want to come back to that in just a moment with all of you. This is Pienaar Friends with Noa Hoffman from The Sun, Kevin Schofield and Molly Ball from the Wall Street Journal. We are with Barclays Business Banking. Grow your business. Bank on Barclays.
Times. Pienaar Friends on Times Radio with Barclays Business Banking. Grow your business. Bank on Barclays.
Noa Hoffman's here with me from The Sun, Kevin Schofield from HuffPost UK, and Molly Ball from the Wall Street Journal from the other side of the Atlantic. Molly, let's sort of come back for a moment on that thought about Ukraine and the idea that there may be some movement there. We've been waiting, well, it seems 2 weeks at a time for the president to decide whether he's going to take strong action against Russia to try to force Putin to the negotiating table. Always 2 weeks, then comes another 2 weeks, and nothing seems to happen. But Volodymyr Zelensky spoke to the president today for maybe 15 minutes, came out saying he felt satisfied by the conversation. And then at the news conference, President Trump was saying he may be in the market for providing Ukraine with some more Patriot missiles. They're so important to Ukraine's air defence. And you wonder if, I don't know if thaw is quite the right word, but he does seem to be maybe moving in the direction that Volodymyr Zelensky would wish to see.
Yeah, absolutely. I was struck as well by the tone of the way he described his view of the leaders in question. That, he seemed very frustrated with Putin. He talked about the discussions that they've had and said, Putin came to me and offered to help with Iran, and I said, no, what you need to help me with is Russia. You need to fix this thing that you're doing. It seemed very clear that he feels like he's not getting anywhere with Putin, and he is frustrated with that. And meanwhile, there's a real change in the tone in the way he's talking about Zelensky, a very warm, describing the bravery of the Ukrainians. He had a sort of emotional moment with a Ukrainian journalist who he was asking about, her husband who's back in Ukraine. And so he always describes these conflicts in the bloodiest terms possible, but with a real sort of feeling for the loss of life that war entails. And I think people really respond to that, whether it's, there was a moment where he talked about people getting their heads chopped off with machetes in Africa. And then when he talks about Ukraine, he is always talking about how many people are dying and what a waste he views that as. So I think there's been a real change in tone, certainly when you look back on the meeting in the Oval Office where he and the vice president confronted and humiliated Zelensky. There's been a real change in the way that he talks about both of the leaders in this conflict.
Yeah, I mean, Noah and Kevin, at least President Trump is not talking about Ukraine as being equally culpable for the war, or even more culpable than Russia for the war in Ukraine. Look, better late than never, but let's hope that's the case.
Yeah, let's hope that's the case, but let's not hold on to too much hope, because as we've all been discussing, Donald Trump responds to flattery, and we never know when Putin can suddenly decide to dial up the charm meter with him, and then he changes his mind again. And, we see, let's say, with the likes of one of the biggest sycophants to Trump, Benjamin Netanyahu, even he got the F-bomb treatment when Donald Trump didn't like what Israel was doing, striking back on Iran after they initially broke the ceasefire. So I think the problem is that he is so fragile in terms of what upsets him, what makes him happy, to the extent that we've got Mark Rutte using the term daddy, which, by the way, is particularly irksome because in youth parlance in the UK, that actually has quite sexual undertones as well. So it's just a sort of bizarre thing to hear. But more
bizarre than I thought.
So yes, obviously, we welcome any movement towards more empathy and understanding with Ukraine. But I think we know that Donald Trump is so temperamental, and it's just, I think it would be wrong to hold on to too much hope.
Okay, maybe a fair warning. We are talking about President Trump after all. Now, I want to bring in this. It's a line just breaking now on the Reuters news agency, which is reporting the chief of staff of the Israeli military says that the Iranian nuclear program has absorbed a hard blow and has been sent years back. That is, I suppose, Molly Ball. Earlier on this morning, our time, we heard Donald Trump saying there was going to be some words, there were going to be some information from Israel on the state of what's left of the Iranian nuclear program. When he said that, you sort of think, okay, he's expected to get news to back up what he's saying himself, which is it's been pretty much obliterated. But now, yeah, we do hear from the Israeli side that the Iranian nuclear program has been sent back years, which is still, Molly, an interesting contribution.
Well, the Trump and the Trump administration are very, 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 very keen for this operation to be seen as an unqualified success. And you heard Trump today, as well as on social media yesterday, really extremely upset by the reports on this preliminary intelligence report that we and others, and particularly CNN and the New York Times, reported on yesterday. And this was an intelligence report that said, with what was described as low confidence, that there may not have been a significant deterioration to the Iranian nuclear capabilities. So, the assessment from Israel, Trump talked about this today, saying that it was that shouldn't have been put out because it was preliminary in nature. I think everyone would like to see some kind of more conclusive reporting. Who knows if we're going to get that? This is, of course, a very secretive regime and a secretive situation. But I do think that the way that the Iranians responded suggested that they felt significant weakness in that moment, that they did not do as many, retaliatory strikes as they might have, or as severe retaliatory strikes as they might have. And they did indeed come to the negotiating table as they had said that they would not. And the ceasefire was wrapped up quite quickly. So from the point of view of the administration, this all adds up to the belief that this has been, again, a sort of unqualified success, and so they are seizing on any reporting that would back up that narrative. And I think it is still too soon to say whether we know that that's the case.
Yeah, I mean, this is Donald Trump talking to reporters at NATO just a short while ago, telling us that the American hope now was to be able to reach an agreement with Iran over the nuclear program.
We're going to talk to them next week with Iran. We may sign an agreement. I don't know. To me, I don't think it's that necessary. I mean, they had a war, they fought. Now they're going back to their world. I don't care if I have an agreement or not. The only thing we'd be asking for is what we were asking for before about we want no nuclear, but we destroyed the nuclear. In other words, that's destroyed. I said, Iran will not have nuclear. Well, we blew it up. It's blown up to kingdom come. And so I don't feel very strongly about it. If we got a document, wouldn't be bad. We're going to meet with them, actually. We're going to meet with them.
So a meeting coming, Molly, says Donald Trump. Well, you do wonder if he's right, as he says he is, that the nuclear program has been utterly obliterated. What's the agreement going to be doing? I suppose. What would you say about that? Maybe as well to have an agreement in black and white that they're abandoning their nuclear plans as not having one, but it would still leave some of the same questions unresolved.
Well, look, I think the story that Trump has told about this action has been somewhat consistent, especially for him, where he has consistently said that this was about whether Iran could have access to nuclear weapons, that he tried to engage in a negotiation with them that had a deadline and an ultimatum. They surpassed that deadline. They did not meet the ultimatum. Therefore, consequences were in order, first by the Israelis and then with backup from the United States. So what he's saying is, if it is true that we've destroyed their nuclear capabilities, what is there to negotiate? There's nothing that needs to be negotiated. Now, is that true? We don't know yet, right? And could a negotiation still be useful in making sure that that's the case going forward? Of course, but you can see how he's trying to communicate, number one, the success of the American operation, and number two, trying to send a message to the Iranians that they sort of had their chance, and at this point it's too late.
Yeah, I mean, it was reported before the bombing, or around the time of the bombing, that Iran had managed to sort of spirit away 400 kilograms of enriched uranium before they could be struck by any strike. And there's still, as you say, Molly, there's still this question mark over whether the centrifuges deep underground have been finally destroyed. Is there a program there which still needs to be, whatever shape it's in, needs to be dealt with?
Yeah, I mean, I think it might be just a little bit early to be declaring victory, which is what Donald Trump clearly wants to do, and Israel as well. I'm reminded of George W. Bush with the mission accomplished sign on the US aircraft carrier back in 2003 after the initial invasion. Clearly that turned out not to be the case. Both America and Britain ended up bogged down in Iraq for many years to come. So yeah, we obviously hope that Iran's nuclear capability has been destroyed, but as I say, I think I'll be a little bit, I take what Israel and Trump says with a bit of a pinch of salt on that one right now.
Yeah, I would completely agree. I mean, it's important, again, to note the sort of sense of a bit of terror coming out of the regime in Iran, and we're already seeing the repercussions for Iranian civilians. There's been a massive crackdown even on people who so much as follow Israeli social media accounts. So there is panic among the Ayatollah's regime. But with that being said, we actually can't make a complete and comprehensive assessment without the full range of evidence, and we just don't have that yet. I think Trump did have a bit of a point when he said leaking is selective. That is very true, and in our experience as journalists, we know that as well. But also, we haven't had evidence to the contrary, which is to show the American and Israeli point of view of, unrivaled success. So it is very hard to make a judgment at this point.
Molly, just lastly, as ever, thank you so much for joining us. Look, we are doing what we do, especially on this show. We chuck out doubts and question marks and caveats and refusing to believe almost anything anyone says. But we're going to go on. We're going to go on doing that. But Donald Trump has at The Hague. He can walk back and rightly take credit for a deal to spend more money on defence. The bombing of the nuclear sites did have the effect of bringing about that ceasefire, and now the talk is of some sort of further agreement. Longer-term questions, yes, they are going to come. That won't change. But back in the States, Molly, as he heads home to where you are, this is not going to do his ratings any harm at all, is it?
Well, look, I think the big question that both panelists have sort of put their finger on is what happens if this conflict reopens? I think it would be naive to think that this is it and we have peace in the Middle East now and everything's going to be hunky-dory going forward. And so the problem with making these sort of preliminary declarations of victory is that it does leave those questions open of what the U.S. role would be when and if there is further conflict. And let's not forget the war in Gaza isn't over either. So I think there's a lot of open questions. In terms of Donald Trump's popularity, it has certainly helped his popularity among Republicans who are very much sort of rallying behind the commander-in-chief and the military. But he's still very bogged down with his legislative agenda in Congress. They are in sort of the final throes of those negotiations, and everyone is very unhappy, as they tend to be in the final throes of negotiations. But the bill is unpopular. Trump is unpopular. His economic proposals are unpopular. His immigration proposals are unpopular. Was this, and this was not a protracted war with American troops on the ground. So does it create a sort of rally around the flag effect where everybody is so excited about this great military victory? I wonder if it even feels big enough to people for that to be the case.
All right, Molly, really good to have you with us. Come and join us again soon. Molly Ball there from the Wall Street Journal. Now, after the news, we're going to be talking to the Armed Forces Minister, Luke Pollard. Do stay with us. Tell us what you're thinking. This is Pienaar and Friends, and it is 6:31, so time for the news with Andy Hayes.
UK, on DAB, online and on your smart speaker. This is Times Radio.
Thank you, John. Good evening. The Prime Minister has confirmed the UK will increase defence spending to 4.1% of GDP by 2027. Sir Keir Starmer's also agreed to increase that to 5% by 2035, along with other NATO countries at a summit in the Netherlands. NATO Secretary-General Mark Rutte says it's a historic commitment. Leaders have described Russia as a long-term threat. Shell is in talks to buy BP, according to the Wall Street Journal. Talks between company representatives are said to be active. Times Radio's business correspondent Dominic O'Connell says it's potentially enormous.
Giant deal, probably the biggest deal the London market has ever seen, I think, and we'll wait and see what happens. Shell, I think, has always said that it has quite a high barrier to making this kind of a deal, but it would give it a great presence in gas. BP is very big in gas and gas trading, and the two have very complementary operations in the Gulf of Mexico, which is a very exciting place for oil and gas at the minute.
If the deal comes off, it'll create a company big enough to rival the American giants Exxon and Chevron. Here, a man's been found guilty of murdering a 14-year-old boy with a samurai sword as he walked to school in East London. 37-year-old Marcus Monzo almost decapitated Daniel Anjorin and attacked 5 others during a 20-minute rampage in Hainault at the end of April last year. And Emma Raducanu is out of the tennis in Eastbourne. The British player's been beaten by Australian Maya Joint, who's into the quarter-finals. And for a news bulletin when you want it, search for the Times News Briefing on the Times Radio app.
This is Times Radio.
Radio on YouTube for the latest videos and interviews.
Pienaar Friends on Times Radio with Barclays Business Banking. Find out how Barclays can help to move your business forward. Search Barclays Business.
It's with me on Pienaar Friends, Noa Hoffman from The Sun and Kevin Schofield from HuffPost UK. And we are joined now live on the line by Luke Pollard, the Armed Forces Minister. Welcome to you, Luke.
Good evening.
Good to have you here, Luke. There's a lot to talk about with you. Before we get into NATO, defence and other matters, I must ask you about the welfare reform bill, because that's so pressing an issue at Westminster and in our politics here at home at the moment. The Prime Minister, he was at that Nato Summit. He was asked about the welfare bill and the massive Labour rebellion that's been and still is brewing, and he said he can read the room. What should we read into that, Luke? I mean, you would immediately think he means that he understands the strength of feeling and he's going to have to give some ground to it, because surely if he doesn't, Luke, the government's going to lose the vote.
Well, this isn't an easy situation, because we know that the welfare system is fundamentally broken. We know that to fix it, we're going to have to take some difficult decisions that the last government wasn't able to take. And if you look at what's happening at the moment, the safety net is not working for so many people. There's people who are seriously ill, who are being required to undertake yearly, difficult, demeaning assessments with a work capability assessment. That means the system's not working. We know that there's a lot of people who are being moved to a lifetime of worklessness. 1 in 8 of our young people are not in education or employment. There's nearly 3 million people in the country that are economically inactive, and there's not the support there to help people who want to work to be able to get back into work. And that's what these welfare reforms are looking at. And I think, between now and the vote on Tuesday, the government is listening to people and their concerns, not just in the Labour Party, but across Parliament.
Yes.
And we'll be putting the welfare reform bill to a vote at second reading to look at how do we fix this really difficult, broken system that is failing so many of our most vulnerable people in the country.
Right, but if there's, let's say, 127 Labour MPs, maybe more by now, who will not vote for this bill, they think it's too harsh, they want to see it changed, you, the government, would be mad to press ahead with this vote. You will surely pause that vote and look at what can be done to modify those rebels. Surely that's just ABC. It's 1 + 1 = 2 in politics, isn't it, Luke?
Well, today at Prime Minister's Questions, Angela Rayner was standing in for the PM, who's obviously at the NATO Summit, and she said that there will be a vote on the welfare bill on Tuesday.
Until there isn't.
I'm planning to be voting on the welfare bill on Tuesday. I imagine most Labour MPs are as well. And that's the approach of the government. Of course we listen to our colleagues. Of course we listen to the whole range of voices. But we've got to fix this welfare system. And I think if you look at the whole range of proposals, the vast majority of them carry very little media attention, very little political attention, because there's such huge support for them. We know they're difficult to do. And where there is a challenge in terms of, especially where we're looking at PIP, making clear to folks that 9 out of 10 people that are currently on PIP will still be on PIP, that the extreme examples that we see of some of our most vulnerable people that people are worried about, well, they'll still probably be eligible for PIP with these changes. So I think telling the story about what's in the bill, rather than the genuine fears that I think lots of people have when any changes are made, I think is an important part of what ministers like myself and others need to be doing between now and Tuesday. Tell the story about how we're going to get Britain's welfare system back on track, because it's certainly not working at the moment.
Okay, precious little time, though, of persuasion and arguments and threats, doing much to disarm this really dangerous-looking rebellion. Luke, Kevin Schofield and Noa Hoffman are both here with me. Kevin.
Hi there, Luke. I was just wondering whether you think it was a mistake initially to try and sell these reforms as a fiscal measure, as a way to help fill this black hole that Labour say they were left by the Conservatives, this £5 billion figure, which was put forward by Liz Kendall, put forward by the Treasury, that this needed to be saved in order to help balance the books. Was that the wrong thing to do, and that maybe in retrospect it would have been better making the positive case for these reforms in terms of getting people off benefits and back into work?
Well, I've always spoken about welfare, about the people that are involved with it. And when it certainly comes to money, we're still spending £16 billion extra with these changes than we're spending today by the end of this Parliament. So we're certainly spending more on welfare at the end of this. But for me, it's about how do we fix a system that is failing so many people. And I just look at the folks that are worried to death about their work capability assessment that comes around all too frequently. Now, we want to scrap them. We want to have a system where if you're genuinely unable to work, that you get proper support. But for those people who can work, we want to help them to be able to do that. That means more face-to-face support. And I think if we tell the story about how the extra support, the £1 billion extra that we're putting into that face-to-face support, that can help people, because I haven't met a disabled person who doesn't want to work, but I know enormous numbers of them for whom the system's stacked against them at the moment and they don't feel they can get the help to give it a go. And that's why, in addition to the extra support we're putting in, we're introducing a right to try, because there's lots of people who worry that if they give work a go and it doesn't work for them, that they'll lose their support and that will put them into destitution. So the right to try is a really important step, I think, of helping people who can work back into work, and that's good for our economy, and most importantly, it's good for those individuals that will be able to earn a living and will be able to get the benefits of being back in employment.
Okay, last one on this, Noa Hoffman.
Hi, Luke. I was just wondering, what does this say about the character and talent or intellect of Labour MPs, that there are so many of them who seem to think it is okay that the welfare bill is due to spiral to £100 billion by 2030. But, these measures cutting just 4.7, I think it is, billion from this giant bill is still too much for us. What does that say about the sort of thought process and ideology behind so many of these Labour MPs, that they can't understand your argument that being stuck on a lifetime of benefits is not a kind thing, it's actually quite cruel?
Well, if I look at the names of my colleagues who have signed the amendment, I think these are good people who care. And I think the place that we're looking at here is people who are saying, look, I'm concerned about a particular group. I'm concerned about impacts here. What we need to do as ministers is to listen, to communicate what's in the bill rather than what people fear may be in the bill, and to make the case that this is, for the vast majority of disabled people, a positive. And for those people where there are particular concerns, to be able to listen to them, to be able to meet them, to be able to have that conversation. Because, look, if this was easy to do, the last government, as useless as they were, they would have done it, right? Getting Britain back on track is going to take a lot of effort, and it's going to take some brave and difficult decisions. That's why the Prime Minister is pushing ahead with this, because frankly, if we don't get on top of this, if we don't help people back into work who can work, well, it's not only bad for the economy, which is one thing, but it's leaving those people who should be able to have a much better life on the sidelines of society, and that's simply not good enough.
Yeah, if these are good people who can, these potential rebels, Luke, why not threaten them with being kicked out of the party or losing their careers?
Well, I'm not aware of exactly every conversation that's taken place between the whips and my colleagues, but I mean, the way I approach it with my colleagues when we've discussed this around Parliament is I don't get the impression that any of them are doing so just to be difficult or to be argumentative. They're doing it because there's a genuine concern around some of the most vulnerable people in society. Okay. And you know what? It's good that we're having a debate about how we support those, because frankly, they have not been supported for over a decade with a system that's not working. But this conversation is going to go right on until Tuesday and beyond.
All right, well, it'll be interesting to watch that. I mean, we did put questions too on that because it's such a pressing political issue. I do want to get your thoughts on the NATO summit we've been discussing for the day, and again, grateful to you for joining us. Where do you think this leaves us, Luke? The relationship between America and the rest of NATO after the agreement that was struck today. President Trump has been given tributes by all sides, praise to the skies by the Secretary General, other ministers, praising him too. But then I see Mark Rutte, the Secretary General of NATO, has given an interview to Reuters just now, and he's saying that US capabilities will gradually come down as Europeans step up. He says there'll be no gaps, it'll be well organised, but the American capability and contribution will be scaled down. It does look as if America will be stepping back.
Well, I think the outcome of the summit is a good one for NATO members. The increased defence spending pledge, I think, helps demonstrate that all members are stepping up to deal with this increased threat that we're all facing. You know, America has for many years, under many different presidents, been saying to European nations that they want to spend more focus, more time and energy focusing on the Indo-Pacific. What we need to do is actually listen to them. And that's what we are doing. And that's why the increased stepping up of defence spending that the UK has been leading on and that many of our European friends are also doing is so vital, because it's not just about how much you spend, it's what you spend it on. We have to make sure that what we're spending is genuinely interoperable, is increasing the deterrent effect that stops Putin threatening NATO members, and especially for those countries in NATO along the eastern flank that border Russia. This is a serious time for them. They can see what Russia's doing in their illegal war in Ukraine, and it's right that we step up to support all our alliance members, because their security is our security. And with the threats that we've seen with Russia posing to the UK, not just using chemical weapons on the streets of Salisbury, but the way that their spy ships loiter over our critical infrastructure at sea, for instance, we know that there's a threat here, and we're stepping up, we're responding to it, and I think that makes the alliance stronger.
All right, Luke Pollard, Armed Forces Minister, thank you so much for joining us. Good to have you on. You're listening to Pienaar and Friends with Barclays Business Banking. Find out how Barclays can help move your business forward. Search Barclays Business. Now, following this show at 7 o'clock, we got Kate Borsay. She is going to be talking to Therese Coffey, the former Health Secretary and Work and Pensions Secretary, about her take on Labour's plans to save £5 billion or so in welfare cuts. She'll also be talking to Matthew Saville, who's Director of Military Sciences at RUSI, on how close we can get to the truth on the success of that US attack on Iran's nuclear sites. And after 8, Christine Berzina, the Managing Director of Transatlantic Security Team at the German Marshall Fund, will be giving us the lowdown on how the increased defence spending will change NATO's capabilities. Here with me on Pienaar and Friends, Noa Hoffman from The Sun and Kevin Schofield from HuffPost UK. Big event coming up next week. It's building up to something of a climax. And, you know, a lot of big political stories, they get a big build-up and then they sort of fizzle out and you think, what was all that about? This one is going to be a big moment, isn't it, in the life of this government and for an absolutely central plank of its agenda, both in terms of public spending and in terms of just reforming the shape of the state.
Yeah, I mean, it's ironic that it's coming a day before the first anniversary of last year's general election, when Labour, as we all know, won a majority of 165. It's remarkable, really, that we're now in a situation where 12 months on, they could be losing a vote, which you would think was virtually impossible with a majority that size. Now, from speaking to Labour MPs who've put their names to the amendment, this reasoned amendment, which would effectively kill off the bill, so far they seem pretty determined to rebel. They are pretty impervious, I think, to all the threats and the arm twisting that not just the whips but cabinet ministers.
How serious has that got?
Well, if you listen to the MPs themselves, they will tell you there has been all sorts of, the classic, well, you won't get your career will be over. You can forget ever becoming a minister under this Prime Minister if you rebel, to things like withdrawing funding from the next election campaign, to make it more difficult for him to get elected. There's talk of whip being removed. I don't know how you can remove the whip from over 100 MPs.
Well, no, the answer is you can't.
Well, you just can't. So I think that's a bit of an empty threat if indeed that threat's been made. But undoubtedly there is some serious work going on. The magic number here is 83. If the 83 Labour MPs rebel and all the opposition parties vote with the rebels, then the government loses. We're looking at around about 123, we reckon, have signed the amendment thus far. Yeah. So that they're having to peel off another 40, and that's a lot. And I dare say they'll be able to do it with some. Some will be more enthusiastic about rebelling than others, but it's still a big ask, I think, for them to try and get them all that number down before Tuesday.
No, you were making the point. You were asking the question, are people really in, I don't know, for want of a better word, are they being realistic? If you've got a government at a time, any government at a time where there isn't enough money, where public debt is at an almost unsustainable point, where the expectation, people's willingness, their tolerance for for tax increases is pretty much at the ceiling right now. That was said by Alistair Darling years ago, and the level of taxation was way below where it is now, but we're there now. And you've got borrowing at a point where the Chancellor was really nervous about putting more into the borrowing column for fear of a reaction in the markets and the debt markets and so on. And you were saying, are these Labour MPs who are rebelling, are they being realistic? Are they just willing to take tough choices which have to be taken? What were you thinking there?
Exactly. So with your interview with Luke Pollard, the Defence Minister, just moments ago, he said that a lot of the MPs who have signed their name to this amendment are not your usual far lefty suspects. They're people who genuinely are very passionate about this and genuinely feel like it's unfair. And I agree with him. I think that is completely true when you have a look at these names. The problem is there's very little room for being puritanical and ultra kind when you're in government. Government is a hard job. It's not going to be easy. It's not all going to be pretty. And when you have a look at the reality of the financial situation of Whitehall and of the country, the predictions of where the welfare bill is going to end up is categorically unsustainable. And so these Labour MPs have to decide whether they want to work in the charity sector or whether they want to be MPs and really get a grip on what the reality of the situation is and how it can be worked around. And I do think for a lot of Labour MPs, they came in, and this is all well-meaning, by the way, but I think they came in to Parliament with a lot of nice fluffy ideas about creating a socialist utopia, which is fantastic for them, but that's just not the reality on the ground. And I think as much as it's genuine, if they wanted to make a difference based on, being nice and having big aspirations that don't really meet with the reality of governance, they should basically pick a different job. And that, they should. And there is room for the much more ideologically driven MPs to really hammer home points and try and perhaps sway governments to take different approaches. But when you're getting to the point that a critical mass of MPs, 120, are willing to just stay in the status quo of unsustainable budgets, unsustainable finances, that is not going to do the country any favours. And it's not going to do any favours to a lot of these poor people who the state has effectively said, it's fine, 20-year-old person with depression, you stay on a life of benefits, you stay in your bedroom forever. That's not kind.
Yes. I'll ask you both, who spend your time wandering the corridors, grabbing people as they go past the statues and whipping them into corners and asking them what they really think. How are they dealing, these Labour MPs? They're not all the same cast of mind. How are they dealing with the dilemma that Noah's setting out there? They know the welfare bill has to be constrained, but we're talking about MPs who would tell us, if they were sitting here, that we're not arguing necessarily in favour of people who anyone could accuse of milking the system. When it comes to personal independence payments, these are payments to people who are working and need these payments to go on working, to get to work, to get up in the morning and all that sort of thing. How do they deal with that when you talk to them?
Yeah, I think it is tough, obviously. No one likes to get a phone call from a senior colleague putting pressure on them. But I think what is really striking is how many of the names on that amendment are new MPs. You know, they were only elected last year, and you would think they'd still be in the first flush of enthusiasm for
dreaming
government.
of a job.
Absolutely, dreaming of a job. The last thing they want to do is kill off their career within a year of being elected. A lot of them, frankly, don't think they'll be here after the next election. So, you know, that basically means the shackles are off.
Yes.
You know, the threat that you're not going to, you might lose your seat at the next election. A lot of them think, I'm going to lose my seat at the next election. They're looking at the opinion polls. I maybe squeaked in last July. The chances are I'm gone. So I'm just going to vote with my conscience. And it's very difficult for the whips to try and persuade those people to maybe set their conscience aside and show loyalty to a prime minister who they think they don't have any loyalty for.
It was easier for the Blair landslide, wasn't it, than now? I mean, they've got 2/3 of the seat on 1/3 of the vote, and that does not look as if it's going to endure, you know, for very much longer after another election. You can see why they don't think, look, you can threaten me all you like, but I've got to go home at the weekend and tell people why I'm voting.
Yeah, and that is verbatim what is being said. You know, I've even heard I'm so unlikely to win my seat that even if I have to live out my one-term career as an independent, so be it. At least I'm doing it with some gumption and my own principles. And that is the stage that we've got to. But I think there's a real problem in number 10 if they didn't see this coming. Or, I mean, Luke Pollard again was talking about how, you know, in order to solve this big dilemma, we just need to communicate more comprehensively and more convincingly what this welfare plan actually entails. I mean, how have we got to a stage where this far after the announcement, number 10's thinking, oh no, like we didn't get the comms right in terms of communicating to our own party, let alone the country. And that's a big failure in terms of the personnel around Keir Starmer.
Yeah, and Keir Starmer, his position, I mean, his popularity isn't where he would wish it to be by a very, very long way. He's not going to go. For all the talk of a confidence element to the vote on Tuesday, he's not going to go. Of course he's not. And nor is the Chancellor, who's a big driving force behind this, and nor will Liz Kendall. She's the Secretary of State in charge of the bill. Although back in the days of normal, if a cabinet minister were to lose or to see a bill torpedoed that they are responsible for, you would expect them to at least offer their resignation. You know, you don't really imagine that's going to happen, or that it would be accepted if it's offered, which it won't be. But there will be damage. I mean, how do you rate that at this point? When you're writing your stories on the eve of the vote, I mean, how are you going to paint the picture of apocalypse for the Labour government?
Well, huge damage, there's no doubt about it. As I said earlier, you know, when you're sitting on a majority of 165, you should not have to worry about losing any votes, far less a vote about something as significant as this policy. I spoke to one person in number 10 earlier today, and they were, you know, maybe putting a brave face on it, but they said, if we lose the vote next week, if it goes ahead and we lose it, fine, we'll withdraw the bill and then we'll come back again in fairly short order with, you know, similar proposals.
You think they would, but you wouldn't have a vote you know you're going to lose, and the whips will tell them they're going to lose.
Well, absolutely. Now, that is probably the least likely scenario. So another person, a senior figure in government, told me this morning there's two options. One is pull the vote. The second is you make major concessions to the rebels.
There's no time for that now,
to get buy off.
But both are humiliating options, right?
It's exactly what he said. It's exactly what he said. The first one is terrible for Keir Starmer's authority. The second one of concessions has financial implications. You know, that's going to cost money. So you're back to this, well, £5 billion. That needs to be found from somewhere else. If you're having to literally buy off these rebels in order to get the vote through, you know, then you're in a really difficult spot. So I think we're at a stage now where there are no good options at all as far as Keir Starmer's concerned.
What about the opposition? Do they even gain from all of this? I mean, the Conservative opposition with their, you know, I don't know, transparently and sincere offer. It's always made at this sort of time when you've got a government in a crisis. But we'll back you if you do things that you can possibly dream of doing, you know, in a fit. But that doesn't mean the Tories are going to come out of this looking very good or gaining ground with the voters. I
mean, they're loving it.
Are they going to gain much from it?
No, they're not going to gain much from it, but I think it is a sort of rare opportunity where they are not looking like the most sort of irrelevant people in Parliament. Like, the Tories are really struggling to sort of make any sort of ground in terms of media coverage or having their views put out to the world, namely because they are refusing to have views on a lot of issues. So here, I think they, even if it doesn't, and it won't result in any sort of change in the polls for them or change in public opinion, they can have fun playing with Labour and making Labour look bad. And they're enjoying it, which is understandable.
Well, let's make a forecast on where we're going with this on this Wednesday evening as the tune strikes up and we get towards the very end of the show. So weekend leaks to the papers. This bill is going to be paused. We get the news before the vote that it has been paused with a view to consultations and a look at rewriting it to make it acceptable. And after that, all bets are off.
Yeah, I mean, I think the most likely of the scenarios that I mentioned is that the vote doesn't go ahead, that they pull it.
I think it will be concessions.
Yeah, but will they pull the bill?
No, I think they'll change the bill
before
or
Tuesday.
An amendment or something. Yeah, that's but
or promise amendments on, say they're coming, later on. So vote for it now, and we'll promise you we'll do you right by later on. We'll see very, very soon. Thanks for joining us. Thanks for listening, Kevin and Noah. Always a pleasure. Kate Boyce is up next. Emily Leahy was our outstanding producer. Isaac Marley on the keyboards. See you tomorrow.
Across the UK, on DAB digital radio, online and on your smart speaker. This is Times Radio, the voice of the times.
Thanks, John. Have a great night. It is 7 o'clock. It's Kate Borsay and the Evening Edition. Coming up.
We're going to talk to them next week with Iran. We may sign an agreement. I don't know. To me, I don't think it's that necessary. I mean, the only thing we'd be asking for is